In the previous video, we saw how to generate or how to build the shading network that works incompatible with Seneferu shading and texturing automation, and we saw how this is being also published as Katana Python, where the shader can be loaded in Katana as well. Now I will show you how to build the same shading network to be compatible with Seneferu's automation, but this time I will show how to build it directly in Katana. So let's say that in the database here we have some shader task is assigned to me, like say we want to do a brushed metal. Let's call it metal brushed. So when we search for metal, all metal comes to us. So shader, and I will assign this to me. This is the production manager is notifying me that I have a task here assigned to me, brushed metal. Okay, the first thing we will do is that, of course, the task is now in my tasks list. Then the first thing we will have to do, because we are going to work in Katana, then we will select the Katana application and we will set the task to current. When I set the task to current, this will connect the Seneferu production manager to Katana's task control here. I will set my task to in progress and I will load dependencies. What load dependencies is going to do now is it will load the Katana template or the generic Katana template that ships with Seneferu, and it will load any other testing assets that you have previously published to the testing env task. In that case, because we are working on a shader, maybe you can publish something like here in the shared assets, you can create another task or have the production create another testing environment task for you that could be a shader bowl or something that you can use as testing when you are building this asset. So currently this Katana template that we will discuss it more, we will discuss about it more later. This looking simple Katana recipe is actually doing everything you may expect to have in production. So what the Seneferu production manager did now is loaded the Katana template and loaded the other dependencies using a method in Seneferu called import and connect. Import and connect will load any assets and will feed them to this node here automatically. So, and any assets fed here, if it has previously published textures, then it will automatically resolve through the Katana template here. For example, you will notice that this object now is having a generic shader because this was having a generic shader tag before. That when we built it, actually, when we published it through this task. Anyway, all this is beyond the scope of what we are doing here. What we are going to do now is that we will build a shading network. Let's say network material. Actually, the latest version of Katana is having network material create, which is a really cool user interface for building shading networks. But for now, I will just use the same network material that we have here. So let's say I'm building a render man shader, and let's say PR man shading node, and let's bring in Pixar surface. and immediately call this. This is my task name. And I will call this something, whatever, let's say that. Doesn't matter anyway, but it's good to have clean names that you can have it later, because when we publish, actually the task control will take care about a lot of things for you, including the names of the nodes, but it will take care about this only, not everything. So, but it's recommended that you name your nodes properly. Now what you are going to do is that connect this here. So you can find it in your materials here. So you can assign it to any objects that you are testing or something. Let's say that I will work now on for example, any model here. Let's take a teapot and use it to test our shader. Okay, you can here go to material overrides. You will find several empty nodes ready for this. Anyway, all this is something you know how to do and what to do about it. Also, we have to go to the render camera because this is already configured for rendering in the Katana template here. So now the important part and the reason why we are here now is to see how to create the texture node paths to be compatible with what Seneferu is going to use later, or to be compatible with Seneferu's assets. If you notice that if you check any asset coming from Seneferu database, you will find that the asset has some information here that we are using in the shading and texturing later. So what you are going to do is that, first of all, as we said before, when we are building the Katana, when we were building the Maya shader network, you will tweak the shader as you want, even without textures. You will set, for example, the roughness values, the specular, whatever, the shading parameters that you want to tweak without attaching any textures. Then whatever you want the texture for, or the shading components that you want to expose for texturing for this particular type of material. So you will assign to them a texture node depending on which render engine you are using. I'm using now RenderMan, but you can use 3D Light or Arnold or whatever. Then let's say we will assign this to, let's say, to the diffuse color. Of course, this is metal. I'm not going to do this, but just the first one I saw. Because I will not use this shader in the library anyway, we will delete it after, I will delete it after showing how to publish it. Anyway, so let's say that this is the diff metal brushed text, and we will get Pixar texture, and here. This is the most important part, and this because this is the file name and how we set it, so Seneferu can utilize it later in render time without you have to come here for any reasons later. So, and by the way, remember that for the shading components that you are planning to expose for texturing, don't tweak their shader values, because you will have to set it in the default value here. So let's say that I want the default value here to be any color, like whatever. Let's say I want this to default to this color. And here, this is what you have to put in the file path. This is the texture directory, and this is the asset name or the object name inside the asset, and this is the shading component that you are putting this texture for. Later, when we publish a texture from any application, like for example Maya, the texture will be written automatically to a specific folder with specific name regarding to this object in this asset. This file path is going to be a symbolic link for the texture that will be published in the future, and that will resolve automatically in Katana when you render this asset that has this texture published later. So just for now, make sure that this is the expression you are using to set the file name for any texture node, for displacement, for anything that requires a texture path. You will change only this. Then, once you do that, you can actually refer to the shader library that ships with Seneferu for any information. If you have something, just you can open any shader or from the shader library and see how did we configure that shader, in case if you are confused about anything here. Also, because we are using underscore map ID, we are going to set this to this. Any default values you need to change here, you can change it now, because now we will assign this, let's say, for the diffuse color. And now this is all what we need to do. You will build your whole shading network, do whatever you want in the shading network. At the end, you have to put all these into a group and call this group, for example, again, metal brushed. Notice that I used capital letter here because Katana, of course, will not allow having two names. It will give a number instead. Now, all what you need to do is to, after you have already, of course, tested your shader and did everything, then now what you are going to do is to select this group and click on Publish. What Publish is going to do now, it's asking for a snapshot. Let's say that I rendered something. I can take a snapshot for it here. And that's it. What is happening now is that actually, if you saw the terminal, you will find that the task control now is writing out this into, is publishing this to the server, and is going to, let's set this yes. And if you check now what is published, you will notice that this wrote a Katana template, the Katana recipe, and live group version of the shader. So this later, when you load dependencies for the whole shader library, where you want to collect all the shaders into one library, like this one actually here, all these shaders are coming from the shader library that is actually here in Katana, here in the Katana template, yes. This is actually the published shader library before. If you get the version of this one, this is because I published several times. When I add more shaders or something, I publish a new version that has the shader library. So let's say now that I want to load the shader or all the shaders I have into one shader library. Let's create a new recipe, and let's open the project shader library. When I set this to current, of course, it will connect to Katana, and by the way, it will set all the information you need here. And when I do load dependencies, I will not load everything. Actually, let me load just a few shaders. Let's say I want to load these two shaders, and when I do load dependencies, this is actually finished and approved. That's why it's telling me to set it in progress. What is going to happen now is that this is going to load the shaders that I selected. Notice that this is the metal that is actually here. This is coming from Maya, by the way. This is now was built based on the Katana Python script that was published when I published this shader out of Maya. And this is a live group that is the one that we built before. The reason why I want this to be live group is that I want to have multiple versions of this shader later, and the one we approve is the one that goes for the production later. So to manage and to control the versions of the shader, it's recommended to have it as a live group as I have it here. Now I'll just check out the shader library that I already built before. This is actually all the shaders that I have here, and these are actually shipped with Seneferu by default. So all what you need to do after loading dependencies and getting all your shaders loaded here, put them together using a merge node and create and look file materials out. Then when you click on publish, this will write out this into a look file here, and it will have the extension matklf because this is just a custom type that lets Seneferu later understand what is this for. So that's it. All what you need to do now is to click on publish. Once the shader library is published, this becoming, when it's published and approved, this will automatically update the generic Katana template that we have here. If I check out this here now, then this automatically updates the asset here. If I click on show dependencies, this will show me all the shaders used and the version of each shader used inside this inside the shader library. And by the way, if you didn't select anything, it will show you information about all the assets used to build this recipe. All the live group, for example, for the primitive and instances resolve, and the other assets that were used to build this Katana recipe. Now, when you have the shaders and the shader library is published, then anything is fed to this Katana template is going to be shaded and textured automatically through the nodes here. We will talk in more details about what the Katana template that comes with Seneferu is doing for you.